see how it might help move a policy forward is the most rewarding part for me. So one example on this could be...
This is Andrei Vasilyev. He's the Assistant Director of Economic Development at the Office of the New York City Comptroller. He studied economics at Stanford University and earned a master's in public affairs from Princeton. In this episode, we break down what working in public policy looks like, who this career is for, and how someone can realistically get there. This is his career playbook.
All right. Hey, Andre, thanks for joining us today. First question we want to start off with is just setting a baseline to understand what a role in public policy actually looks like or means. So we know your title is Associate Director of Economic Development. Could you explain to us what that actually means and what your day-to-day actually looks like?
So also give a disclaimer, any views, opinions I present here are my own and don't necessarily represent the Office of the New York City Comptroller or any other official capacity. So in terms of day-to-day role of my job, I would say my work is kind of a cross between working as an economist and a public policy analyst. And so in plain terms, that means I use information about the state of the economy and the population, political and policy environment in order to analyze and give commentary on the laws and regulations that affect everyday people. In my case, New Yorkers. And the way I see my specialization within public policy is I call economic policy, which is a pretty broad umbrella term, but that can mean things like income and wages, employment and job quality, financial well-being, social safety net programs, housing, and so on. And in terms of my role on a day-to-day basis, what that often means is I and my team are working towards some kind of a written output, typically a public report, where we will do a deep dive into an issue, like let's say the racial wealth gap in New York City and New York State. Deep dive on it, kind of bring in some quantitative analysis, but also qualitative historic information, debates on the policy end, and come out of it with a recommendation or a set of recommendations for what policymakers and lawmakers should do to better, the lives of New Yorkers in whatever way is relevant to this topic. So the ultimate goal tends to be to influence public policy in one way or another. It's something where, we're one of many, many people, and this is kind of the way public policy works. You're always one of many trying to just steer the boat a little bit more in one particular direction.
Got it. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And one thing I wanted to ask was learning more about your why. Like, why did you pick this career in the first place, and your thought process behind that?
Yeah, I've kind of always had an interest in public policy since I was a kid. Potentially I can point to, coming from an immigrant family. My family comes from Russia. There's maybe a little bit more of detachment and kind of an outside view of social and economic institutions, such that you question things a little more why does a particular political or social apparatus need to work this way? Why is our economy set up in a certain way? But, beyond that, I think at the end of the day, the why was really just being interested in and wanting to help address issues of poverty, inequality, and people's well-being in the United States. And so there's a lot of room for that. I think no matter what your background is, as long as this is, you are interested in bettering the lives of people, it's a million ways you can kind of get into that. There's no one right background for it. There's no one right major for it. There's no one right first job for it. The point is kind of understanding that you are motivated by improving some part of our society can really guide you.
And you've been in this role for a couple of years now, specifically at the Office of New York. Was there a specific moment or story that you can share where you felt proud or excited to be working in the industry?
Yeah, I would say it's anytime really that we get to take, the analysis we've produced, the reports we've produced, and engage with external groups. That means with community organizations, with state legislators, other lawmakers, presenting to the general public, anything that gets people to engage and you can see people's kind of live reactions to it, see how it might help move a policy forward is the most rewarding part for me. So one example on this could be a year or so ago, I worked on a report where we took a look at the state of the racial wealth gap in New York State. Um, Wealth gaps tend to be much wider than income gaps in this country. And wealth, meaning that's things like the home you own, the assets you have in your retirement account, um, different, investments you might have and pieces of businesses you own. And we took a look, we not only kind of quantified the scope and breakdown of the components of the racial wealth gap in New York, but also addressed historical issues that have led to it. And so this report, not only did we publish it publicly, but we sent it to some legislators' offices. We sent it to the governor's office as she was considering, whether or not to sign the bill. And so when you're kind of most tangibly involved in a particular political cycle, like getting a law passed, that's what I think is the most exciting part.
Got it. I think you mentioned a little bit on this earlier about the passion and the impact that you can drive in this role, being a driving force for why people should work in policy. I am curious though, do you have any thoughts on what kind of people would do well in this career path? Like, are there specific qualities or skills or traits that come to mind that set someone up well to have a strong career in public policy?
Yeah, I think there's a couple components to this. One, the interest, just the kind of level of empathy that's necessary to kind of just want to engage with communities and kind of better the situation of people other than you and your immediate circle. And I think most people have that kind of empathy. I don't mean to say it's only people working in policy. But I think a key quality is also just inquisitiveness and ability to think about our social systems from a structural perspective, to try to understand what are really the root causes behind any given issue, like what is driving, particular kind of the growth of poverty in certain cities, around certain industries, what is driving unemployment or greater employment in certain areas, and really continuing to ask why, being able to take a big picture, structural look at the way our society and our economy function. And again, that can mean a lot of things. A lot of people kind of explore, some people work in immigration, some people work in housing, some people work in climate, some people work on social safety net programs, right? But in any case, I think the core to being an effective, policy worker is to be a little bit always wanting to learn more about particular issue, learn the nuances, learn connections between different facets of an issue. Beyond that, I think, if you get into the realm of more specifically like economist, economic policy, analyst, you want to also have kind of a good grasp of quantitative thinking. That doesn't mean being really good at math or arithmetic or anything. Really, if anything, it means just knowing how to think empirically and statistically. So yeah, knowing how to separate anecdotal evidence from, what is actually more verifiable based on long-term data is important. But yeah, I mean, other than that, it's not one specific skill. There's so many ways to get involved in public policy. You can be a good press person. You can be a chief of staff for an elected official. You can be a community organizer, right? There's like any different skill you might have. If you are interested in working public sector, working in public policy, there is a way you're going to be able to apply it.
And if you don't mind also sharing some industry standards around how much someone can expect to make in this career path at different stages of their career, starting as a new grad out of college all the way to someone who might be 10 or 20 years into their career.
Yeah, maybe in today's terms, depending on where you're at, you might be looking at like starting salaries as low as 50K or as high as 80, 90. It'll go up if we're talking like 10 years out of your career. This kind of role, maybe you can expect between 100 to 150 or so. And people at the top of kind of the deputies in any given agency, kind of the heads of any agency and the most senior people, you might get into the 200s, depending on what you're doing. Some cities even more. That's the range. No one's going to be making $500,000. I will say A good resource for this is most public sector organizations have transparency laws that you can look up people's salaries online.
Got it. Well, super interesting to hear. I do want to switch gears a little bit and kind of come back to your story. Could you tell us a little bit more about your path to get into your current role? Like everything dating back from high school to college, like how did you choose your school, majors, internships, etc.? Would love to just understand that story.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, as a kid, kind of politics was always interesting to me. Not to say I knew a lot about it, but starting in high school, I would try to volunteer for like local political campaigns in the LA area where I grew up, and I kind of connected with the Young Democrats Club, and they just say, okay, go door knocking in this particular area. I went to Stanford for my undergrad, and I came in thinking I would do physics or something similar to that because, I was always into math and science as a kid and assumed that's what I wanted to do. But by the time I started college, I realized really I'm much more interested in social systems and in trying to pursue political change. And so I shifted and I took economics classes, I took poli-sci, sociology classes, and I was still scattered. It's not to say I all of a sudden had a vision of what I wanted to do and knew how to get there, but took different internships, one at an international nonprofit for a summer, doing research there. After my sophomore year in college, one kind of pivotal opportunity I had was working at the Federal Reserve Board, in DC for the summer, and that really started this interest in finance, financial regulation, just macroeconomics in general. That turned into taking more of those types of classes in my junior and senior year of college. But first job out of college was actually not public sector. It was private. I went into management consulting, which, a lot of people are probably familiar with this, but there's a kind of, if you go to a target school, there's a couple industries that, people are really gunning for, which is finance, consulting, tech, whatever. Those are kind of like the top tier jobs coming out of college. I took a job in consulting, which seemed like it was good to just kind of like get this private sector experience and business experience that I had never had before. At the time, I quickly came to hate it. Around my 2-year mark there, I was really hustling to make connections in certain public sector industries and organizations that I found really interesting and impactful. And so at this point, I was like reaching out to dozens and dozens of people on LinkedIn. I probably had like 20, 30, phone calls and coffee chats with different people at the Federal Reserve, so different financial regulatory agencies, other government agencies, people who work in politics. And just those kind of conversations are so useful to not only making connections, which is important, but also just getting a real sense of what the day-to-day work is like of people in different types of roles, in different types of organizations, because it's just not something you're going to get otherwise. And so early on in your career, have those conversations. It's really valuable. So I ended up getting my next job at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, really enjoyed my time there, then went after 2 years there to grad school at Princeton for a master's in public affairs, so a policy degree essentially. While I was there, I also did this thing again of like trying to contact everyone I could in the alumni network. I'm just like, I have probably another like 30, 40 conversations over the course of my time there, maybe more, trying to get a sense of what people's day-to-day is, trying to make connections as well. And each of my roles a lot of my roles have basically come through those kind of person-to-person connections. And this is true across any industry, not just public policies. It's, kind of those connections you make can be really important. But yeah, I went to grad school knowing I wanted to pivot a little more into more directly political work. And that's how I ended up after grad school for the last 3 years, working for an elected official's office, doing a job where I'm more directly providing commentary on here are the laws and regulations that should be passed, right? Having more of a political bent to my work, which is what I realized I wanted to shift more into.
Got it. So I know you talked a bit about like how much effort you had to put into reaching out to people, and like I know potentially coming from private sector job could have added an extra hurdle there. So I'm curious if there was like a high schooler today that wanted just like the step-by-step playbook to get to a career in economic policy or public policy, like, could you tell us about the most optimal path to get there?
If you're able, try finding alumni from your school who work in jobs that interest you and just ask them for like, hey, can we have a 20-minute phone call, 30-minute, can we meet for coffee for 30 minutes? Write out your questions in advance before meeting them. You'll be a lot better prepared. And just think about what you actually want to know. Don't necessarily think, ask, hey, how can I get a job in your field? But rather like, what do you do? A lot of the questions you've been asking me today, like, what do you do day to day? What does that mean in practice? Who are you often working with? What is the output of your work and who interacts with it? How does that end up impacting X, Y, or Z? Like, ask these concrete questions about the work people do. And again, you're going to learn a lot more about the types of organizations, the types of roles that are out there and what interests you more. And if you do that in college, you'll be like miles ahead of most people. Like, that's not something I was doing extensively then, but I think it's been one of the most important parts of my career.
Well, Andre, that pretty much sums up the episode here. I feel like I learned a lot about public policy today, and we're really excited to share your story with this next generation of students. So again, thanks for joining us today.
Of course, yeah, really glad to be here.